Medurstand Understanding Medicine.
I'm Professor Aziz Rehman from Medurstand-Understanding Medicine. And today we are going to discuss a relatively new concept called time in range. And we're going to compare it with a traditional test called hemoglobin A1c. And you all know hemoglobin A1c is abbreviation of glycated hemoglobin, which actually reflects previous 3 months glucose level. And time in range has come up as a new concept with the availability of continuous glucose monitoring. And there are some advantages of TIR over HbA1c, and I'm going to highlight those. Not to say that HbA1c is not useful anymore, but of course TIR has something additional to offer. Now, this is the agenda of today's talk. First of all, moving beyond HbA1c in diabetes management, and number two, new emerging concept of time in range and its challenges and opportunities. And the third agenda item is a derivative of time in range and role of different drugs which we can use according to which the dosage we can adjust according to the time in range. And then of course finally I will present summary. So history of glycated hemoglobin is long. What is glycated hemoglobin? It is actually non-enzymatic binding of glucose with beta chain of hemoglobin A. Now, it is irreversible binding, and at any level, it reflects how much glucose you have in the body. Since average RBC life is 120 days, and this glycated hemoglobin is irreversible and it will remain present in the RBC as long as that RBC survives. So on the average, HbA1c would remain elevated for 3 months if your sugar is high. So that is hemoglobin A1c, and it was first discovered and it was found that it is different than hemoglobin A. Then somebody found that it is related with glucose. Then its role of in glucose monitoring and diagnosis was established. I think this is the fine details, and if you're interested, you can pause the video here and then see this in detail. So HbA1c era is characterized by 3 phases. One is main monitoring criteria. Now, once scientists realized that HbA1c in the blood reflects one's average glucose, it was used for glucose monitoring. Compared to self-monitoring of blood glucose, hemoglobin A1c is considered convenient because irrespective of time you can do it, and it will give you an average of 3 months. But it gives you an average. It doesn't give you that particular moment's glucose. So first role of hemoglobin A1c was in monitoring of diabetes. Typically patient comes for a follow-up, and patient is on a stable medical therapy, anti-diabetic therapy, and he comes for a follow-up, and 3 months down the line with medication, patient gets his A1c, and then doctor will assess if this is within the goal, less than 7, then same treatment may be continued, and if it is above goal, then treatment is further increased, like that. So later in 2010, and ADA and EASD, they included this A1c as diagnostic criteria, and 3 categories were defined. Anybody having A1c of less than 5.7%, not 5.7%, but less than that, would be considered normal. And anybody who has HbA1c of 6.5% or above is diabetic patient. And then the intermediate range, 5.7 to less than 6.5, is called pre-diabetes. This pre-diabetes itself has got two categories, but based on A1C, anybody having A1C of 5.7 to 6.4 or less than 6.5 would be called pre-diabetic. And then finally, main outcome marker was also based on A1C. Many studies have shown that 1% lowering of A1C has got significant advantage over microvascular complication prevention, also some advantage in macrovascular complication. So A1C was used as a goal also. So this is the history of A1C. A1C never replace plasma glucose monitoring, because plasma glucose monitoring is still important. It gives you instant value and it also helps you to adjust the medication. A1C gives you 3 months average. I think the value of 3 months average is that somebody comes with multiple self monitoring glucose values plus his A1C is also within the goal. That would be, I think, very, very reassuring that diabetes during the previous 3 months has been under control. But there are some limitations. What are those limitations? Using HbA1c alone to guide glycemic targets has not been optimal. As I said, it doesn't give you that instant value. It doesn't tell you about hypos and hypers. A1c does not identify hypoglycemias or glucose variability. And hemoglobin A1c can be affected by a wide range of conditions. And wide range of glucose profiles can be associated with the same HbA1c level. So I'm going to examine these and some of these points in more detail. But let me come to this point again. Hypoglycemia would require immediate action, and HbA1c doesn't tell you about hypoglycemia. That's one major limitation. And it is possible that patient has frequent hypoglycemias and despite has high HbA1c because his sugar fluctuates through a wide range. So the A1C is still high although this patient has hypoglycemias. So HbA1c can be affected by a wide range of conditions. There is actually a fairly long list and I'm going to give you this list of more important conditions. For example, lab techniques. HbA1c is done with various techniques, and so if you compare one lab's report with another one, there could be significant difference in the value. Hemoglobinopathies, particularly thalassemia. Now, all hemoglobinopathies can affect your HbA1c because HbA1c is actually glucose bound to hemoglobin. So naturally, if hemoglobin is abnormal, HbA1c would also be abnormal. But beta thalassemia is particularly important because number one, beta thalassemia trait or minor beta thalassemia is a fairly common condition. Many people have it and they may not even know it. Number two, this glycation actually occurs with the beta chain. So if you do not have beta chain, of course you have some, if you have a low level of beta chain, despite high glucose, your A1C may be low. So that is another limitation. When there is a hemolysis, the cells which have this glycated hemoglobin, they are destroyed and the new cells which are formed, they are not glycated. So again, during hemolysis, hemoglobin A1C would underestimate your glucose. Blood loss, same thing. And blood transfusion, if you receive blood transfusion and the person who is a donor, maybe healthy person, of course, his HbA1c will be normal. So then case patient's HbA1c will be again underestimated. Chronic kidney disease, which is unfortunately a common complication of diabetes. So if somebody is diabetic and develops chronic kidney disease, HbA1c does not remain that reliable. So that is why we always look for alternate means also. Traditionally, we have been using glucose values, but now there is a possibility of some other things. So it's time now to move from HbA1c to a better thing, at least technically, although TIR, time in range, also has some limitation, which I will highlight, but at certain points it is better. So it goes beyond HbA1c because TIR gives you the value, the immediate time in range, and I'll explain to you what I mean. So what is time in range? Time in range is the percentage of time a patient is within the glycemic range of 70 to 180 milligram per deciliter. Now this 70 to 180 is arbitrarily defined. Now we know that 180 is actually high for a normal healthy person. So 70 to 180 is usually considered acceptable time in range for diabetic patient. Anything above this would be time above range, and anything below this would be time below range. And this became possible only with the availability of continuous glucose monitoring. Now, these are two devices, and this is available in our country, and this is actually intermittent continuous glucose monitoring. You wear a scanner here which would last for 2 weeks, and then you program it with the device. This is called reader, and once it is configured, then you could check your sugar anytime, as many times a day as you wish. So you could just bring this scanner close, this reader to the close to the scanner, and it will give you the reading. So whenever you experience hypo or hyper, or you just want to know your sugar for whatever reason, then you can have it tested without a prick. So this is intermittent, but the even better is continuous glucose monitoring devices. These are more expensive. So you actually wear two devices. One is a sensor and the other one is the receiver, and this one receives glucose values, and this is continuous. And it is done all the time, whether you are working, whether you are doing some job or sleeping or whatever. It is continuously, your glucose is continuously recorded and received with this device, and then further transmitted to the computer, and this data can actually be transmitted to the treating doctor also. This could generate alarms when there is hypos or hypers as configured, and it can actually give you the warning if your sugar is falling too fast, even if at that particular time sugar is within the normal range, but since it is falling too fast, so it actually gives you a warning that you might end up having hypoglycemia, so might as well eat something. So these two devices are continuous glucose monitoring devices. There are limitations. I think the biggest limitation in our country is expensive, the cost. And so this one is relatively cheaper, about 20,000 per month, and this is about, I think, 50-60,000 per month. Now, this is the time in range concept. So within any time, 24 hours, so this range 70 to 80, which we can adjust, which can we vary from person to person. For most adult patient without major comorbidities, I think 70 to 80 is considered time in range. So as long as your sugar value remains within this range, it will count it as time in range. There could be time above range, that means sugar is above 180. So from 180 to 280 is stage 1 hyperglycemia, and from 280 above is called stage 2 hyperglycemia. Stage 1 may still be okay, but stage 2 then signals the possibility of going into diabetic ketoacidosis or hyperosmolar state. Similarly, you could have hypos, time below range. If the sugar is below 70, then it would be called, but above 54, stage 1, time below range. But if it is below 54, then it is stage 2. Of course, stage 2 hypoglycemia is the one which is serious, or it could be serious, and third party intervention is needed. So this range, the time in range corresponds with 17 hours per 24 hours. If that is the case, that your glucose is control is accepted. So time in range should be more than 70%. So 70% of the time during the day, that is 17 hours per 24 hours, sugar should remain within this range. And this would correspond with HbA1c of 6.7 to 7%. All right. Okay, so time above range maximum I think should be less than 25%. And out of that, 6 hours stage 1 and 1 hour stage 2. If it is more than that, that means your sugar is too high. Similarly, time below range less than 5% is permissible, and out of that 60 minutes in stage 1, that is 70 to 54, and less than 15 minutes in stage 2, because stage 2 could be very dangerous. So this is the value of time in range. You give a more clear picture and more instant value. Another point which requires further highlight: wide range of glucose profiles can be associated with a given HbA1c level. Now what I mean by that is that you have same HbA1c, but patient's actual glucose profile may be different. Now let me show you how this happens. Now this is an example. So these are 3 persons, all have HbA1c of 7%. Okay, and 7% HbA1c gives you an average glucose value of 154. Now 154 average glucose value and 7% is not ideal, but is considered acceptable, because controlling diabetes better than this would lead to hypoglycemia. These are the 3 examples. Now in example 3, patient has 100% time in range. That means throughout the day his glucose level is within the range, and this person has got mostly hypos, and many times, about 1/4 of the time, hyper. This person has got hypers and hypos, but this one has got least variation. But HbA1c is the same, 7%. So that is why time in range, I think, is getting popularity, because it gives you a better picture. It doesn't just give you an average, it gives you a better picture. Time in range 70 to 180, time above range 180, and time below range 70. So this is how this graph is developed. In a normal person, this is how our glucose changes. Of course, it doesn't stay at one level. After meal, glucose rises, but only up to a certain level. So this is the glucose rise and glucose drop, and then a rise. In diabetes, we expect that blood sugar should stay below 180 even after eating, and should not go below 70 when you have not eaten. And this time in range is being accepted by the world with a different pace, because many financial constraints are there, and people are accepting it, but very slowly. Why time in range is preferred over HbA1c? Time in range is inversely correlated to risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So that is what matters. Why it matters? Because in type 2 diabetes, 80% of the morbidity and mortality is related to HbA1c. Is related to cardiovascular disease. So 80% of morbidity and mortality is related to cardiovascular disease. So TIR is inversely related to the chances of developing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, like A1C also. and it is a better indicator of glycemic control because it tells you hypers, and whatever time you want to know the sugar, it gives you the instant value also, and it picks up hypos and hypers. So that is why uh, time in range is considered better than hemoglobin A1c. Now let me now give you a comparison of the two. This slide shows that time in range and microvascular complication. I've already told you that time in range is inversely related to atherosclerotic aortic cardiovascular disease, but it also correlates with microvascular diseases. This is retinopathy, this is microalbuminuria, indicative of nephropathy. In both cases, you can see that better time in range means less complication. So comparing the two, HbA1c, it gives you single value of A1c, which reflects 3 months average, whereas time in range, the continuous glucose monitoring devices gives you continuous glucose values. Compares every 3 months and compares any period. And variabilities, hypos and hyperglycemia is not recorded in HbA1c. You may have frequent hypos and still your A1c may be high because you have hypers also. But this one reflects sugar excursions more accurately. It can warn you about hypers and hypos even before they occur. So immediate effect of medication not recorded. For example, somebody comes with high A1c and you make some adjustment in the medication and you would not know the effect until another 3 months. Whereas TIR, you make some adjustment in the dosage of insulin or oral medication, and I think within days you will know that your values are getting better and the new treatment is better. And high susceptibility to interference because of the variation in hemoglobin, whereas this is not that much susceptible to interference because this is actually a measurement of glucose itself. One advantage of HbA1c is that it has been there for a long time and it's a good correlation to clinical endpoints and many long-term studies are there. Whereas TIR is relatively new and it is very promising, but data is not as robust or as much as we have about HbA1c. But I'm very hopeful that with the time in range would also show the proven benefits. So the concept of derived time in range. One point I highlighted, one downside of time in range is that you need expensive device. But there is a concept of derived time in range with just normal glucose monitors, which almost every diabetic patient has. So what is it? 9-point self-monitoring of blood glucose profile can be taken at different time intervals. And time point of the fingerprint readings were before breakfast, before lunch, and before dinner. So this gives you pre-meal values, 90 minutes after each meal, that would give you the postprandial or the highest value, then at bedtime, and then 4 a.m. in the morning because this is the time when there is a possibility of hypos, and then before next breakfast. So it is actually 9-point including the next day breakfast. So you could take these values not daily, intermittently, provided patient is on stable medication, patient is on stable diet. So you could take these 9 values intermittently and from that you can derive time in range, and this is how we do it. Derive time in range, number of in range reading. So out of 9, for example, 7 were in the range, so 7 will be counted, and number of total readings taken. So readings in range divided by total number readings and multiplied by 100. This will give you the concept of derived time in range. Now this again, the same concept would be applicable. Above 180 is time above range, below 70 is time below range, and 70 to 180 is time in range. So with simple device, simple glucose meter, you can have the same information which we get from the continuous glucose monitors. Of course, you would need to make multiple pricks, but not every day. It may be after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then you can have a fairly good idea. Most probably, you would still need to have A1C at the end of 3 months period, because that will further confirm that glucose has been under control. Thank you very much. I hope I was able to give you some account about this new concept, time in range, and its comparison with HbA1c. I really look forward to see you in my next presentation, and if you are interested in my channel, you could scan this QR code, and this lecture and many other lectures are available free of cost. Thank you.